Greetings and welcome to the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel, live from Mobile Podcast Command. Going to make myself a fresh cup of coffee. Got everything all ready to go. And we're going to talk about the latest podcast, which has to do with, unfortunately for me, going with the flow. We're going to talk about that kind of a situation where you're in the Grand Canyon and you have a mechanical, and it just ends up taking days to get the right parts, get it together. And then get the guys to fix it. So we're going to talk about that in this quick, long update. It's not a short. It's just going to be an update on what I'm doing and how it's going while I drink my coffee. I was going to get coffee. I was down in the canyon, and I was going to get coffee. And it's just full of tourists today. So this is the day of the eclipse, and there's lots of people here. So I'm just going to sip my coffee and we're going to talk about this. So if you've been following me in various incarnations, Instagram, the audio podcast at thebobdavispodcast.com, and of course right here on YouTube, you know that I'm kind of stuck in the Grand Canyon. It's not catastrophic. The problem, as I explained in the latest podcast, is just a pressure hose, and we're having some trouble getting the parts. And the people here at the park have a shop where they work on all the park vehicles, the buses, the cars, the electric cars, all the things that they have. They're really not set up to do consumer, civilian contract work. But when you lose a pressure hose, which runs the brakes and the power steering in a vehicle like this, which has hydraulic power steering and brakes, you're pretty much out of luck because you have very few. I have brake fluid, very bad brakes, and of course, very bad, tough to steer over 10,000 pound vehicles. So we are waiting for the parts. The sad thing is that last week I ordered parts right after, so the Thursday or Friday after this happened, you have to order the parts, and this is all explained in the audio podcast, so I'm not going to go into this in depth. And the mechanic tells you what to get, and then you order a part, and we got the wrong parts. So now we've had to reorder, and we got our fingers crossed that these are going to be the right parts. I've been in Grand Canyon now for probably, I'm saying it's going on 3 weeks. And, I was very frustrated, having a very tough time, being extremely frustrated with the situation and the people and, the whole 9 yards. Despite the fact that the Park Service couldn't have been nicer and more helpful, and of course the fact that these guys here were just have been great. The situation is just frustrating. And finally, I got into a situation where I was so worked up that I finally said to myself, boy, there's got to be a reason why I'm here and I'm essentially, it felt like there was a hand that was holding me back from leaving. So I just surrendered, basically. I said, okay, fine, I'm here. This is what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm here, and I just, whatever, turned it over, and have had a great time since, really just enjoying the Grand Canyon, walking. I'm down in the Grand Canyon Village. I started this sort of journey at Desert View, which is about 25 miles, I think south of here, maybe north, I don't know. And because I'm not prepared I didn't look at the map before this YouTube video, so I don't even know which direction it's in. And the Desert View is beautiful. I have been in this part of the Grand Canyon a couple of different times, but just I really didn't understand this is where there's a number of shops and stores and restaurants and hotels here. So when you come to the Grand Canyon in the winter, let's say, you would come here more than likely. There's a huge campground over here, Mather Campground, something like 320 campsites. So it's a big complex, and it's spread out. The geography is, where I am, the village is about half a mile that way, and the campground is about a mile and a half that way, and then the store it's almost 2 miles to the big grocery store. So it's geographically pretty expansive, and you can't drive this thing even with the bad. I mean, I can drive it a mile, but I can't drive it with the bad brakes and the power steering. Not to mention the fact that the more you drive it, the more pressure you put on the pump, which makes sure that you have enough hydraulic fluid to run the power steering and the power brakes. So we're just going to wait, and when we get everything, then we'll revisit. But the podcast is about giving in to these situations, and all of us nomads we've all been in this situation where you're someplace you can't move until something happens, and it's very frustrating because we're goal driven. I'm very goal driven, and my goal was to move on down and head down to Quartzsite after the Grand Canyon, and I've now been here for almost 3 weeks. So it's good, because when you're just someplace like this, let me tell you, there's a lot worse fates to being stuck than being stuck in the Grand Canyon. This could have happened in New Mexico at 10,200 feet, because pressure hoses break in these vehicles all the time. And the older your vehicle, if you're driving a 98 7.3 pickup, 350, whatever, it can happen to you. If you're driving an E450 or 350 van, it's a diesel or even a gas engine, you can lose a pressure hose. So it can happen anywhere at any time, these little things, especially when you get into an older vehicle. And the first inclination, I mean, your heartbeat goes up, your blood pressure goes up. It's an intense experience. What am I going to do? Then you have to talk yourself down, and you have to say, you're alive. It's okay. You're going to figure it out. And I came back up to the canyon because that was the easiest thing to do. And here I am. And being frustrated really was closing my eyes to just enjoying myself and having a great time. And I've been really having, I think I mentioned in a video on Instagram, the Grand Canyon is an extremely emotional experience. And for me, Arizona has always been an extremely emotional experience. It's the colors, it's the trees, it's the Southwestern architecture, and so much effort was made in the early 1900s, more than 100 years ago, 120 years ago, in building all this stuff to maintain and use the Southwestern architectural styles and methods, in many cases, to create this really respectful environment for the canyon and for the Native American people that essentially populated it for so many years. And that's, some of that is debatable. Some of it is that debatable that there should even be this level of development here. But it's a damn sight better than having 16-story hotels and the type of things that you see on the Outer Banks that have just completely ruined that entire area. Here they managed to put it under a protectorate early on so that the canyon is preserved in the integrity of the culture of the people who lived here, and the canyon itself is preserved, and it's an incredible experience. You cannot look at that canyon and see something that Coronado saw. You cannot look at that canyon and that river, which is, relatively the same as it was 300, 400, 500 years ago, absent the red-colored iron tailings in the water that is stopped at the Glen-Allen Dam, because the Colorado then was probably red-tinged. But you can't look at that canyon 1.8 miles down. You can't even judge the distance that you're looking when you see it, and see a structure, a geological structure, for lack of a better term, that doesn't care that we're struggling with this particular issue or that particular issue, or that people think this or think that, or that there's a pandemic or was a pandemic or a recession or whatever you want to talk about. Whatever topics seem to come up on social media, whatever topics seem to come up in your, whatever this thing is called, X, or your social media feeds, that canyon doesn't care. It just doesn't care. And it's not susceptible to the torrents of opinion that we are subjected to in social media that really ultimately probably don't matter at all. And in the grand scheme of things, the things that canyon has seen and passed through, or that have passed through the canyon, or issues that have passed, or people, or things, or any of the things I'm talking about, the canyon doesn't care. When you look at something like that, then you're open to an experience which is going to be transformative, or is going to be enlightening. You cannot have that experience if you're not willing to go with the flow, or give up, or turn it over, or whatever metaphor you want to use to describe this process of just letting go. I don't like being stuck. I hope I'm not going to be stuck forever. But if I the joke with my friends is, I guess I'm living at the Grand Canyon now. Better go get a job, which wouldn't be such a bad thing. So and I really, I love camping here. I was at Mather. It was great. Desert View is a great campground. Desert View, you're literally, half a block from the edge of the rim, and there's nothing there. There's no restaurants or anything. It's a campground, and you walk to the edge and look right down into the Grand Canyon, and it's amazing. Up here is where all the development, the restaurants and hotels and stuff are, which are really based on, one of them at least, El Tovar, I think it's called, is based on European hunting lodges. This is all this Fred Harvey guy who conceived of and built all this stuff in the last part of the 1800s and early 1900s. I think he died in 1901, and just built this incredible structure up here, and also contracted with Elizabeth Colter to design and to build these structures with the canyon and the culture and everything in mind, as I said earlier. There's a lot of history here. And of course, there's a lot of history here well before the United States. The first white man to see the canyon was in 1776, which is oddly the out east. They were just beginning this process of declaring independence from the the England and the Crown, and forming a new country. And I think the first white man to see this canyon was a Spanish priest, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it was. So it has a lot of history going well back, much further back in history than the United States. So, we're talking about the 1500s, early 1600s, when Spanish quote-unquote conquistadors came through here and in search of, they were looking for development opportunities. They were looking for river to get things down and up, and they didn't think this was going to work. So it took another 100 years at least. Yeah, it took about another 100 years before people thought, maybe we can. And they started working to figure out what they could do up here. So, and there's a ton of history with the United States government and the Mormons and Utah and all of the Native American tribes up here. Not just the Hopi, but all sorts of different tribes that have been part of this canyon since prehistoric times, probably certainly before any recorded history of Europe. These, we're talking 1100s, maybe even further back, probably further back. These people were operating in this region, and it is beautiful. So you might say, well, it's not my cup of tea. I like the oceans. I like New Hampshire. I like Rye Beach, whatever. And I do too. And it's funny because here's the thing about being goal-driven and saying, I've got to get to by, and overscheduling your trip. And I don't do that, but there are people, they take these vacations and they've got 15 things on the menu that they have to do, or on the agenda that they have to do every day. And they have a hard time. They're struggling. And I see tourists up there going through that. They're having arguments. We have to do this by noon. We can't do this. We have to do this, and picking and choosing what they're going to do based on an agenda. And I respect the fact that they are under a limited time schedule. I don't have that problem. I can sit here for the next 6 months if I want to, and if the park will let me.
anything interesting about
But people are walking by, and then, you know, I can't tell if they are looking at what I'm doing or not, which is no big deal. But then I have to figure, am I going to have to talk to them? But what was I saying? And I'll finish this because it's a real simple thought. This concept of travel today is, you know, travel is a dream. And I've had a lot of conversations with people recently about, you know, travel and what it is. When you travel and this is what you do all the time, it becomes very much like sailing. It becomes a dream. There's a lot of things that I forget that I know, and a lot of experiences I forget that I've had. And especially when you're in the flow, it's absolutely bliss, because you're in the flow and you have to stay in the flow. And when you see people who are driven to a goal, they have a hard time. Now, 3 days ago, I was pacing around this parking lot, waiting to get taken care of and driving on to the next thing and having a pretty rough time. Now that I've surrendered to it, I had a fantastic, you know, I've been eating very little for weeks, and once I got stuck, I had to walk a mile to the store so I would get like broccoli and a steak or salad. I don't have anything in the refrigerator except eggs right now, so I've turned it off. And last night I went up to the lodge and I had a hamburger and fries and peach cobbler. No, it was apple cobbler and vanilla ice cream and a gallon of coffee. And it was fantastic. You surrender yourself to this opportunity that you have to have a transformative experience. This Southwestern thing with me is just rooted deeply. But yeah, I was talking about Rye Beach. I had the opportunity. Somebody said to me, hey, you should just stay a few days. And I was like, no, I've got to go. I should have stayed. You know, why not? Somebody said, invited you, you can just park here and stay and we'll hook you up and you could just have some fun and hang out with us for a couple of days. Why didn't I do that? You know, but I was in a big hurry to get across the country and get here. So it's important to remember you've got these opportunities, and it happens to me all the time. It happens to everybody. Somebody will come up and say, hey, you should stay here. Or somebody will come up and say, hey, come camp with us or whatever. And your inclination is to just stay on your path. Stay on the path that you're on and the things that you're working on. And sometimes if you just allow yourself to say, okay, yes. And that is hard for me to do. I mean, it's really hard for me to do. You can have this incredibly transformational experience. All I've been doing is just walking up and down, looking at the canyon. I'm not even going to hike down there, probably. I might go down there tomorrow. I don't know. And it's just, I'm just having a wonderful time. And I don't even care if my truck gets fixed. I mean, it will eventually. So you have to be willing, as in life, these lessons that we learn on the road are useful in life as well. And as in life, it's so hard to know that sometimes if you go with the flow, really great things can happen. And I've had a really hard time learning that in my life, and I'm glad that I have. So the podcast is entitled Glen Canyon Marooned. Marooned meaning to be forced to be, forced into staying in a certain place for a period of time because of a problem, whatever, basically. And it talks about this whole issue of what happened. And oh yeah, I just want to say at the end real quick, mechanical issues for nomads, this is a day-to-day thing. We put these vehicles, and this is Mobile Podcast Command, so this is where I do all my podcasts and sleep here, and this is my house. We put these vehicles under tremendous pressure just traveling around, and they break down. And especially if you have a 20-year-old vehicle or a 30-year-old vehicle, and I see a lot of cobbled together RVs and various types of rigs that we all have as we make our way to Quartzsite or Yuma or California, where we're going to go for the winter. We put these vehicles under tremendous pressure, and they break down, and they do all the time, no matter how much. I mean, the last thing I did before I left Minnesota was have the mechanic double check everything, and he did. But I mean, I've driven 3,000 miles since then. So they break down and things happen, and you got to be prepared for that. And the first reaction is so emotional in terms of heartbeat and what am I going to do? And then once you recenter, reevaluate, and say, what do I have to do to fix this? And then you go do it, and it takes 4 days or 5 days or 6 weeks or whatever. You just have to say, okay, this is where I am, and this is what I'm doing right now. And we learn to do that. It's not easy, but we learn to do it. And I see people posting all the time, even people with kids in buses. They're constantly having problems. We're stuck in, Biloxi with a broken radiator. It's going to take, 3 weeks to fix it because we can't get the parts. I mean, my friend, the Campbell man, spent 3-4 weeks out in the desert at the beginning of spring when it was 100 degrees because he couldn't get the right hose for his radiator. And I went through that 2 years ago in Fullerton, California. Thank God I was in Fullerton because there's 5 Ford dealerships and somebody had one. And I got the last one I got the last one in LA for there's a couple of different hoses on the radiators with these vehicles, the Ford 450 and the big one that goes underneath the radiator. They don't make that part anymore. And that's what I'm worried about with the pressure hoses. But thanks to my friend N. Johnson, who sold me this vehicle years ago at Ex-Government Cars, and I'm not doing a spot, I'm just telling you. I texted him and I was like, dude, I need help. I need to figure this out. And that's all explained in the podcast. He said, FYI, there are companies in every city. They will come to wherever you are and they will manufacture any hose that you want. Any hose you need, they'll make it right there. So if you ever get into a situation where you need pressure hoses and you can't get them, you can be on the side of the road. They'll come and make the pressure hose for you. I mean, you'll have to figure out how to get it in there, but they'll make it for you. So that was real helpful advice, but we ended up going to Rock Auto, and that's all explained in the podcast at thebobdavispodcast.com. I'll put a link in the description box. We are up to 1,600 subscribers, which for some people who have hundreds of thousands is no big deal, but for me it's a big deal. Every little step is great, and I am so appreciative of the YouTube platform and the YouTube audience because you guys are so supportive, and thank you. Thank you all for making great comments, and thank you for listening and subscribing and for going to the whole purpose of these YouTube videos, low-key, low production, old school YouTube, is to go to thebobdavispodcast.com or Spotify or Google Podcasts or Audible and get the audio podcast and listen to it. That's the whole reason I'm doing these videos. So please do that. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for subscribing to the Bob Davis Podcast, the audio podcast at iTunes. And hopefully the next video I'll be heading towards courtside or there. Goodbye. Now I guess I'll get some more coffee.